Hi, my name is Robyn Nichols, and I am here with Betsy Lake and Sarah Allison, and today we are discussing Ellis, Chapter 6, The Role of the First Language. There are 5 factors that we will be going over, although I will be covering only 3. We are going to be covering linguistic factors, psycholinguistic factors, contextual factors, developmental factors, and individual factors. And I am going to be covering I'm going to be covering linguistic factors, psycholinguistic factors, and I'm also going to be covering developmental factors. The first thing I want to do is I want to talk about language transfer. Language transfer are linguistic features of the first language that influence the second language. For example, the English usage of the noun and the adjective, or the adjective and the noun. How the linguistic factors of the English, where we place an adjective for a noun, how does that affect those languages that place, such as Spanish, the adjective after the noun? The first thing in linguistic factors I want to discuss is, let me look at my notes. The contrastive analysis hypothesis, and that is the hypothesis that linguistic differences between the learner's native language and the target language can cause learning difficulty and might result in errors. And this is found on Ellis on page 121. Let's see. Let me look at my notes here. Language transfer, marking the web, psycholinguistic factors. Hang on, let me look at my notes. Order of acquisition, those are long notes. Language anxiety, those are long notes. Okay, so the influence of the first language is the strongest when the difference between the native language and the target language is the greatest, and weakest when the difference is the least. For example, on page 122, Ellis gives you a chart, and it talks about the differences in English and Spanish, and for example, the use of the word for in English, where we only have one version of the word for. In Spanish, they actually have 2 versions, and Betsy may elaborate on this in a minute. You can either use the word por or para. And another thing I was thinking of is the verb is, to be, which is ir in Spanish. Is it ir? I think it's ir. And you could use the word ser and a star. That's what it is, ser and a star. And you have to know in Spanish what the difference is between the verb ser and the verb estar, where we only use the form to be. We talked about the similarity differential rate hypothesis. Did I write that down in my notes? Oh, well, anyway, I guess I didn't. According to let's see, the second language sounds dissimilar to the first language and may be difficult to acquire initially, but over time, improvement takes place more rapidly than with similar sounds. For example, the way the j sound, j, a soft j, and a z. By 10 adult learners of Korean English, it supported this hypothesis. And what I was thinking of was, oh shoot, I had one in mind just now and I forgot what it was. Sorry. And then the last thing, let's see, I want to talk about language distance. And I did write this down in my notes. My notes are all over the place. I apologize for that. Sequence of acquisition, developmental factors, psycholinguistics. Oh, okay, here we go. Language distance also has more complex effects on language transfer than those predicted by the contrastive analysis hypothesis. For example, the distance between the initial language and the target language. For example, 2 languages that are similar it may be easier to learn the target language since the first language is similar. Ellis gives the example of Dutch and English on page 123 versus a language, for example, Chinese and English. And the distance between English and Dutch is a lot closer than it is for Chinese and English. The similarity of the two languages may result in a positive transfer, but it also may result in a negative transfer. He talks about the first linguistic theory talks about markedness, and I will go over that. I have a quiz in a few minutes. Some markers that various languages use that may be common among languages that also, but then there also may be markers that are not common. He gives the example here of using a preposition at the end of a sentence. Let's see, to whom are you going to the party with versus who are you going to the party, or to whom are you going to the prom versus you're going to the prom with who. Let's see how this involves comparing different groups of languages in order to distinguish those properties that are universal or specific to different languages. Some markers may be specific to a language, some markers may be universal, and I'll get to that in a minute. For example, the word cow may be unmarked because it is a generic identifier for a bovine, whereas you have a heifer or a bull or a steer, and those may be more marked because they refer to different types of cows, whether it is a neutered cow or whether it is a female cow or a bull cow or a cow that is under 2 years old or whatnot. So the latter of those may be more marked versus just the unmarked general form of cow. Learners will transfer unmarked forms when the corresponding target form is marked, or learners will resist transferring marked forms, especially when the corresponding target language form is unmarked. A general assumption is that marked structures tend to require more attention, more mental effort, and more time to be processed because you have to be specific in what you are referring to versus just the idea of the word cow. This is the markedness differential hypothesis, and this was developed by Ekman. And it is a comparison of the first language and the second languages, and depending on the language, that marker may be less common, and therefore it may be more difficult to master. The second thing I want to go to is psycholinguistic factors. And Eric Kellerman developed his theory in 1978. Uh-oh, my Siri came on. There we go. Learners have intuitions about which features are more easily transferable between their initial language and their target language. And I could really identify with this because in my rudimentary learning of Spanish, I think about the things I already know. And I actually mentioned in my quiz that I'm going to talk about, we're talking about like cognates and false cognates. What things do you already know that you are able to transfer to your target language? Ellis talked about the word breken, which means to break, and how Dutch learners of English, breken is the Dutch word for break, and Dutch learners of English were able to transfer the meaning of the word breken or break. However, they also did have some negative transfer, some difficulty in negotiating the various meanings of the word break. I broke my knee, or I broke my leg, where they were easily able to transfer that, versus he gave the example of strike breakers. The policeman broke the strike, and they had a more difficult time in negotiating that meaning of the word break. But even so, excuse me, language transfer, um, the learners that have, who already have intuitions about how they will learn a second language, it's called prototypicality. And like I said, it was developed by Eric Killerman in 1978. Let's see. Learners have intuition, core meanings of words were more easily transferable in the second language. There were also errors. We went over that. And again, learners' perceptions about language difference or language distance. Learners felt that it was easier to learn a language that was closer to their native language than a language that was more distant. For example, Dutch, or any of the Roman languages, English versus English, say Korean, Chinese, or anything like that. And similarly, speakers of Japanese or Chinese, learners of Chinese as their first language, probably or do not have. Okay, we were talking about psycholinguistic transfer, and that learners' perceptions about language distance also affected their perception of acquiring a target language. For example, English speakers who learned Dutch, any of the Germanic or Romance languages, perceived that they would have an easier time transferring their language than, say, English who learned Chinese or Chinese who learned English. And similarly, speakers of Asiatic languages, Chinese, Japanese, perceived that they would have an easier time transferring language learning to, say, Korean. So there was a perception of being easier the closer related that the languages were. Let's see. The second thing I'm going to talk about is developmental factors. And developmental factors affect the extent, the first language affects the extent to which simplification and overgeneralization of the second language occurs. The similarities in language are affected by the prior language facilitating new learning. When simplification and overgeneralization are universal features, the first language does affect the extent to which these occur. Let's see. Ellis talks about morpheme studies, and this was talked about in chapter 4. There is a clearly defined order of acquisition. Morpheme studies have provided evidence of the effects of the first language on the second language. For example, Ellis gives the example of Japanese speakers of English who have greater difficulty in acquiring the plural S, houses, cars, beds, than learners whose first language already indicates a plural marker. Let's see. The first language can also impact the sequence of acquisition. The first language can also impact on the sequence of acquisition of specific target language features. And this goes into the first thing we talked about was the order of acquisition, and the next thing we talked about is the sequence of acquisition. The similarity of the native language and the target language may not be as difficult in developing that sequence of acquisition if the native language and the target languages are similar. Let's see. This was developed by Manfred Pearman in 1998. It is the processability theory. And according to this theory, the processing operations responsible for the sequence of acquisition that apply to all learners. And in chapter 4, on page I can't find it. On page in chapter 4, it talks about, oh, here we go. On 76, it was called the ZISA study, and it was German speakers who were learning either Italian or Spanish. And it talked about the sequence of acquisition of German word order rules. And it talked about like how from a Romance language to a Germanic language, and that there was a specific sequence of acquisition. Let's see. There is a the fact that the L2 has to be reconstructed. Learners need to master each processing operation from the beginning for each language they learn can block transfer occurring. Penniman recognized that transfer does have a role, but one that is developmentally moderated. In other words, and let me go back to the ZISA study, it talked about the learners that in the processability theory, learners have to create language-specific routines, which they do in stages, gradually extending their grammatical memory store to enable them to handle the increasing complex ways in which grammatical information is exchanged across constituents. In other words, the processability theory states that language is learned by the learner in a routine and in stages. And so as they advance in those stages, they increase their storage of grammatical routines. Let's see. The next thing let's see, I've already talked about the developmental, I've talked about the psycholinguistic, and I think I've talked about the linguistic. The next thing, I think the last thing I want to talk about is, let me look over my notes, sequence of acquisition, processing operators responsible for sequence of acquisition apply to all learners. All learners learn processing operations in a sequence. Learners have to create their specific language routine. Opposition says second language learning is a continuous process of restructuring. The last thing I want to go over is the transfer to somewhere theory and the transfer to nowhere theory. And the transfer to somewhere theory is found on page 133. And it was developed by Anderson in 1983. And basically it states that there's some degree of congruity between the first language and the second language. And that somewhere that he was referring to is that the target language is similar to the initial language. That the target language is somewhere similar where they can transfer their native language learning to. And in contrast, Eric Kellerman developed in 1995 the transfer to nowhere principle to reflect that there can be transfer which is not licensed by similarity to the target language, and where the way the target language works may very largely go unheeded. And like I said, that was found on page 133 in the Ellis book. Individual factors, it just talks about age and language aptitude. We talked about that earlier in the year. So let me share my quiz with you because I think you will. Safari, let me go over here. Hang on, let me see where my quiz is. It's right here on Safari. And let me share my screen with you. There we go. Okay, so join my quiz.
All right. I'm gonna look it up here. Join a game. This looks fun, Robyn.
Thank you. So, are we ready to start?
Wait, hold on. I'm still typing it in.
Okay.
Oh, I get a guitar. That's cool. Oh, it says you're playing with 5 other players. That's funny.
I don't know how.
5 other players.
We got
Who are these
Sherwina and Lodi
people?
and another Sherwina.
I don't know. Maybe they thought
Oh,
my
hey, you can
quiz
remove
was
3
Robyn, you
Sherwinas.
can
wonderful.
remove people. If you go over their name. There you go.
Oh,
Well, maybe we
let's see
should
what
see
they
how
have to
well they
say.
know.
I'm curious. I want to
Let's
see how they
see how
do.
well they know second language
Yeah.
acquisition.
Let's see how they do.
If they beat
Okay,
me,
we
I'm going to be
ready?
upset.
They're probably PhD students.
Yeah, get rid of them. Seriously. Oh, crap.
It's more friendly competition.
Friendly, okay.
Okay, there's the leaderboard. Let's see. Okay, so themes and questions. Uh-oh, where'd it go? See, this shows you how much I know. Classic, continue,
Well, I have them up
join
on
my
my phone.
quiz, waiting for participants to join. Let's try this again.
Oh. I have questions. I'm okay.
Yeah, mine are like up. It says looks like I peaked.
Whoops, I got that one wrong.
Oh, Betsy beat me.
I got one wrong though.
Oh, well,
Oh, contrastive.
let me do this.
Oh, I can't remember on this one. I might have to look this up. Contrastive. Oh.
Show answers. Settings. Uh-oh.
I don't know who did that one.
English word played. How do I go back to the old quiz? My foot. Assign homework, start live quiz. Yeah, we may have to start a live quiz. I don't know. I can't.
Well,
I'm
mine's
still on it.
like I'm answering questions right now.
Oh, okay. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think we're both in. I'm trying to find this answer here. I can't find this one.
Hold on. Which one is it? I'll give you the answer.
Oh, I mean, I found
No,
the
don't tell me. I want to know. No, stop. I'm gonna
Okay,
beat you guys.
I'll figure it out. I'm looking at the book for it because I can't remember. Not any of these, I don't think.
Show answers preview. Where in the world is my quiz? Because now I can't get to my quiz. Quiz library.
And
Maybe that's it.
when?
Create. Roll of first language. Save. Well, foot.
I'm gonna guess this one. Oh, I got it wrong. Crap.
Ah, I wish I could see what you were doing, but I can't.
I did just answer another one.
Done.
How does
Save
order
to
of
my
acquisition?
library. Follow roll. Duplicate. Did I give y'all the right quiz? I think I gave y'all the right
Yeah,
quiz.
I think so. These are pertaining to the reading. What is this somewhere?
Because I also had the sequence of acquisition quiz.
$133.
Elections.
I'm glad I took some notes while you were talking because they're helping me. Oh.
I don't like
Assign
these
homework.
essay questions. I'm like having to.
Oh, you're
like,
at the last
like-
one.
No, I think they like mix up because I only answered one multiple choice and then it put me on this one, and I'm stuck
we
here
go.
trying to write an answer.
Here we go. Oh, here we go.
Results of
Participants
application.
attempted view quiz, live quiz, 3 minutes ago. Oh, goody. Okay, live dashboard.
Yeah, I'm still in
See?
it. I'm still answering questions. Concerns the learning that results from application of universal developmental principles. Yay! Power up, it says.
Oh, there we go. questions. Oh, goody. Now I can share my screen with you.
What is this?
This session is running live dashboard. Betsy is in the lead. Sherwina, whoever that is,
I only answered
gets
one question.
0. I'm going to share my screen with you again.
Oh, there's more than one. And this one.
Apparently, I didn't go over everything.
Oh, I got one wrong. Shoot. What do you think? Asian language. I can answer this one because I actually have this one on my presentation. Oh.
All right, you ready?
Nope.
No,
I'm on question 7. I still have 3 more to go.
I've only answered one question. I'm still on this essay question.
Oh, I'm
right
on it now
here.
too. We're just a different order.
Yeah.
That's the word I'm looking for.
Oh, I got them mixed up.
I didn't know it was going to be this hard.
I mixed up marked and unmarked. I had a really hard time with that, and that's even in my presentation, and I still got it wrong.
I enjoyed
The mix
making the
up.
quiz, actually. They say it's always harder to make the test than it is to take the test because you have to know what's wrong and what's right.
Genetic and morphine. Oops. Okay, I finished the essay question.
Okay. So let's go over the quiz.
Hold
Oh,
on, I'm not
Or do you
done,
want
I'm
me to
not
wait
done.
on Sarah?
oh, I'm so close. I
Yeah.
only 2 left.
Okay.
Look at, we're just too competitive. We can't help ourselves. We have to get through the whole thing. Oh. Oh, I remember that one. Now this is cute. Looks like you peaked. Oh, it's gone. It was like a mountaintop. Do you pick those to put on here?
No.
Oh, you don't?
Yeah, mine's like, have you plateaued? When it's like,
That's cute. Oh, okay. Almost there. I'm on number 9 of 10. Mhm. Who is associated with that? Ah, Eric Kellerman. Okay, last one. You didn't know it was going to take us this long, did you, Robyn?
No, I didn't.
Oh, Sarah, you're beating me.
I know,
Whoa!
I'm killing you right now.
What the heck? How?
I think I have one more question.
Me too. How are you killing me?
I honestly don't know.
Oh my
Maybe
gosh,
I'm answering
I
them
love your
faster than
answer
you
on that,
can.
Robin. What is an assumption of language distance? You have to travel a long way to hear another language.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Come on, you can do it.
Okay, I'm done now.
Oh, you beat me, Sarah.
I
Beat me.
did.
So
Redemption
let's
question.
go over this. Okay, so what is the constructive analysis hypothesis? It looks like you both got that correct. The constructive analysis hypothesis is that all second language errors can be predicted by identifying differences between the target language and the learner's first language. Number 2, one of you got this correct and one of you did not get this correct. Who developed the contrastive analysis hypothesis and when did they develop it? Do you know?
Nope, that was what I got wrong.
It is
Lato.
It is on Lato and
Lato.
yes. And when was this? In what year?
I don't know. I just picked Lato because I know that one was right.
In 1957. Okay. Number 3. What is an assumption of language distance? And both of you got that correct. The assumption of language differences, an assumption is the closer in similarity that two languages are, the easier it will be to transfer the second language. But also that that theory can also, unfortunately, say that theory may not also be entirely accurate because on page 121 it says, however, contrastive analysts acknowledge that linguistic differences are of different kinds and some differences were likely to cause greater difficulty than others. Here we go, page 123, sorry. However, the similarity of two languages can result in negative as well as positive transfer. So actually that's on page 123. And that was by Sean Holm in 1976. So initially they thought that the more similar two languages were, the easier it was for language transfer to occur. But then some later analysts have also said that there may be some negative transfer as well. Okay, so number 4. What is an example of a marked sentence? And that is on page 124 in Ellis. And neither of you got this correct. The first example was the cow went to the barn, a more marked sentence. As you know, cow could be an unmarked noun because we use the word cow for any type of cow, really, steer, heifer, bull, whatever. So that is an example of an unmarked. Who are you going to the prom with is actually the correct answer because it says in the English language, let's see, it's called Pied Piping, and it's on page 124. Example, Pied Piping, the process by which one element in a clause drags the other words along with it. To whom did you speak? You don't see that the preposition there is at the end. It is much more common than the preposition stranding, where the "wh" element and the preposition are not attached. For example, who are you speaking to? So for this, it would be, who are you going to the prom with? Because that preposition is at the end and it's unattached to the who at the beginning of the sentence.
I should have gotten that one right.
Well, okay.
I should have too, considering it's
I read too quick.
But
yeah, I saw the other one, looked right to me. I just clicked it, and then I was like, "Oh crap!"
Yeah, and like in number 4, it has that preposition and that pronoun, or not pronoun, but the whom, the what. You know, those are linked together, and then everything else is kind of behind it. Whereas the with and the who on example B are kind of bookending the sentence. And how old is Jim? You can use old that old is not necessarily, it's not a very specific marker. So anyway, okay, so number 5. Who is associated with prototypicality? Who is associated with prototypicality? And both of you got this correct. Eric Kellerman. Very good. What are some examples? Number 6. What are some examples of transfer errors? Let's see. And this was actually a multiple choice question, so you could mark more than one. And Betsy, I hope you got the first answer. I hope you got the first answer.
Oh,
Do you know why
star?
I hope you got the first answer?
I did.
No, well, that too. And the other one, the and then P and pi.
Oh yeah.
The false cognates
PA
one.
and pi.
I hope you got that one right too.
Yeah, foot
and then
and
the
pie.
Japanese use, huh?
Foot and pie.
Yeah, foot and pie.
Yeah.
Exactly. False cognates. So that's an example of a transfer error. Japanese use of the plural S. I went over that. Article uses in French and English because both languages use an article. Now French uses that masculine and feminine, and we just use a neuter gender type article. So, and then sir and estar, where we just use the verb to be. Okay, number 7. How does order of acquisition affect language transfer? And you got that both correct. Very good. If there is no first language equivalent of a morpheme in the target language, the natural order of learning and acquisition is disturbed. Very good. Okay, number 8. What is the processability theory? Both of you got that correct. It is learners have to create language-specific routines in stages and gradually extend their grammatical memory to enable, and I misspelled that, to enable them to handle increasingly complex grammatical information. Okay, we're almost through. What is the where, somewhere in the transfer to somewhere theory? And both of you got that correct. The somewhere, there is somewhere the target language that is similar to the first language, and that language transfer can take place. Okay, so, and then how do you think that age and language aptitude affect first language transfer? And that was an open-ended question, and so both of you answer that, and I'm just going to leave that. Shawina, yep, unattempted, Sarah, unattempted. Okay, so that was just an open-ended question. I hope you enjoyed my quiz.
I put it in.
Well, it says unattempted, so maybe you did answer it. It just says unattempted, but that's okay. So
you had unattempted, and you still beat me. That upsets me.
That's okay.
Look, I submitted it right there.
What'd you say, Sarah?
Okay.
What'd you say?
I said that language transfer happens less for younger learners of a second language. That's what our text said, because I don't know. That one was really hard for me to answer on that short of notice. I need approximately 5 business days to answer an open-ended question. Okay. And then same with language aptitude. The more aptitude you have for language learning, the less likely you are to add influences of your first language. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, you know, the first language, if you're younger, the first language doesn't really have that much of an effect on your second language. You know, you're not as strong, which is not the right word, but you don't have that ingrained language mental thing going on in your head when you're younger. And then, you know, aptitude, you know, how ready are you to learn a second language? How easy would it be for you to learn a second language? How motivated are you? So there's a lot of individual factors going on there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my quiz. And so I guess I will hand it over to Betsy.
Okay, thanks, Robyn. I'm actually going to touch on a couple of things you did too, so that will be kind of fun. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, I'm going to make sure you can see this. I did a Prezi today. And let me actually scroll out here. So based on the 2 readings that we did, one by Ophelia Garcia And then also the one by Ellis. Through those two texts, one of the questions I felt was kind of prevalent was, can the L1 and L2 coexist in the same space? So that was kind of the question I asked myself when I was preparing my presentation. And I'm going to focus on 3 areas. I'm going to focus on translanguaging, which was talked about in the article from Ophelia Garcia, Susana Ibarra-Johnson, and Kate Seltzer. So I'll focus mostly on just that piece in that first circle. And then I'm going to talk about 2 factors from the major factors listed in Ellis's book. I'm going to talk about contextual influences, macro and micro, and then also individual influences. So to get started, translanguaging. What is it? It's a teaching method that focuses on a bilingual's own language repertoire, not from the perspective of national or standard languages. So usually the typical idea of teaching bilinguals is to focus on the 2 languages separately. So sometimes you'll see this in the classroom where the teacher will teach just in English one day and then just in Japanese or just in Spanish the next day. And so a lot of the students feel limited in their language and what they can say the day of that class. And so translanguaging is kind of the term that's used from Garcia in her book is actually translanguaging corriente, which means that it's a current, it's ever flowing. So students are encouraged to actually use both languages in the classroom. So translanguaging is actually not the same as code switching or Spanglish when you're looking at English and Spanish. It is a method that allows students to use all of their linguistic features with the intention of being more positive toward bilinguals in the classroom. So I first focus on teacher and researcher Ophelia Garcia. We also had this week, we were able to listen to a lecture presentation that she did. And she is an advocate, teacher, and researcher of translanguaging. First, she was a teacher, first and foremost, before she continued to study this and develop this. So I thought that was interesting as well. And her belief is that bilinguals have one language repertoire, their own. So it's not, oh, I'm an English speaker and a Spanish speaker. I speak one language and I have both of them in my mind, and I have vocabulary and syntax, and I can kind of use them together. What is the problem with other traditional methods? According to Garcia, she says, quote, "The proportion of English used for instruction increases as the use of the other language decreases. English language development then never benefits from its interrelationship with the existing language features of the student's language repertoire. And Spanish development is not supported over time." So she feels that one language is kind of slighted while the other one is encouraged. And so she feels that it's actually kind of unfair to the learner and to the student. And they feel like they have to suppress kind of even a part of their identity. That's her belief. How do we see this in the classroom? So according to Garcia and her co-authors that I mentioned earlier, the instructor plans and structures activities in order to interact with students, families, and communities to ensure that students' entire linguistic repertoires are being used. And the teachers accelerate the students' content learning and language development, and they encourage their bilingualism in ways of knowing, strengthen their socio-emotional development, and bilingual identities to advance social justice. So I thought that was really interesting. Off of just reading the article, I have mixed feelings about it. I think just because I'm also in another class called, as you know, phonology, and studying language sounds, and how we've learned in that class that you can't really transfer language sounds. So even though some of the alphabets may be the same, like when I look at English and Spanish, for example, there's a lot of the same letters, but even each letter makes a different sound. So I have a hard time picturing that, I guess, in my mind to see like how translanguaging can actually work and be super productive. So that was kind of a thought I had about it. However, I like the idea of having students feel that they can use both languages in the classroom in order to like learn new vocabulary and get help from different students. So I thought that was interesting. I guess I just wanted to kind of share my view on it. I also have a quick video I want to show you. It's really short to see kind of, again, maybe you were like me, you're like, how does this even work? This kind of explains a little bit more about translanguaging and how you can see it in the classroom. Also, can you hear that? Could you hear that okay?
Yep.
No? Oh, shoot. I was worried about that. Okay, one second. Let me get back to that. We had this problem last time too. I think there is a way I can make sure you can hear. Audio settings.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you click on like the green share screen, there should be an option right by it to be like share computer audio.
Okay. There we go. Good call. Thank you. All right, here we go.
The first time I heard a description of translanguaging, I was like, what? No way. What is this crazy idea about mixing languages and letting the students use whatever they want in the classroom? I'm a university-trained language teacher, and my whole methodological background was founded on the principle of target language in the classroom. After extensive research and study, I realized that it isn't as crazy as it sounds. The crux of pedagogical translanguaging is accepting that languages can work together in the classroom rather than in competition, and teachers can plan strategically for students to use two languages for learning. There are many strategies teachers can use to integrate translanguaging into their classrooms. The first basic structure I train teachers to use is to vary the language of input, processing, and output in a learning cycle. An example. Imagine you are teaching a history class with learners from diverse language backgrounds. You allow the students to gather information on the topic in their own languages, and then bring them together for a group discussion in English about what they have learned. Then they work separately to write a story in their own language, and come together in groups again to rework the stories into English. In this way, they are building their learning through one language and transferring it to the other, a powerful cognitive strategy. And in the process, they are improving their academic skills in both languages. Translanguaging is an indispensable strategy for bilingual classrooms. It can also be used very successfully in multilingual classrooms. Translanguaging pedagogy is different with younger and older learners, but is beneficial for all ages. Implementing a translanguaging approach requires an openness to innovative practice as well as professional development and coaching. But to see it in action is to clearly understand the significant benefits for learners in terms of their own language development, their English development, their content learning, and their social development.
Awesome. So can I just ask you what you thought of that? Like, did that kind of change your perspective on it when you were able to see that video, or not really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the topic as a whole is really interesting, and I've had like experience with it when I was in Korea. One of my classes was taught in English, but I was the only foreigner in that class. Everyone else was Korean. And it was like a international organization class. So it was like a political science class, and it was taught in English, but the text was in Korean. And our weekly assignment, it was ascribed to everyone, but didn't really apply to me, but we kind of worked it out. But anyway, the weekly assignment was for the students to read the text and then summarize it in English. So they would read the text in Korean and then make a like 2-page summary of it, of the chapter in English, and then we would present in groups. But for me, I couldn't do that because I mean, I was still learning Korean. I was not by any means fluent. So I was in one group and I was like, I'll help you translate because I
Right.
couldn't read it. But anyway, so, but that's taking that, you know, you're learning it in Korean, like learning the concepts in Korean, and then all of our tests and all of our everything else was in English. So I
Yeah,
think
and I
it's a
can
cool
see
strategy.
how it would be more beneficial for the Japanese students in your class. If they were reading it, their first information input was in their first language, and then they're able to produce in their second. and then learn the vocabulary. And that sounds actually a lot like what she just described. So I hadn't even thought of it that way. So when I saw this video, I thought it was really interesting. And I could see how it could be really beneficial. But anyway, just wanted to share my thoughts with you on that. And thanks for sharing yours, Sarah. Oops, go a little further. All right, next section. This is kind of just a quick, I guess, transfer to the next topic that I want to talk about. So language transfer was like the main point of this whole chapter, I thought, in Ellis, the Ellis textbook. And language transfer occurs when the linguistic features of one of one language, there's a typo in there, influence or transfer. Oh, whoa, I had a huge typo there, sorry. Basically, it's when the linguistic features of one language highly influence the other, linguistic features of the second. And the major factors that we see on the Ellis textbook are linguistic, psycholinguistic. Thank you, Robyn, for going over those. I'm going to go over contextual. Robyn went over developmental, and I'm going to go over individual as well. So I broke this up in 2 slides because the book talks about macro contextual influences as well as micro contextual influences, and I thought they were really important to highlight. So this macro contextual influence is focusing on the transfer that occurs in both natural environments and instructional classrooms. The theorists behind this were Odlin in 1989 and Krashen in 1981. And the beliefs that were held by them really focus on negative transfer. That's kind of the highlight that they have. So there's 2 points I want to make about the negative transfer. The first one is negative transfer was less likely, they found, to occur in classrooms due to negative criticism or stigmas surrounding using a different language. This is their belief. Students may be nervous. So I kind of came up with this section. This is how I could see it happening. Students may be nervous to pull knowledge from their L1. And in a classroom, the bilingual student may prefer to not participate at all due to the lack of L2 knowledge or the fear of making a mistake. Negative transfer, the second point is, was less likely to occur in the classrooms due to having more time to conjure up to L2 knowledge within a classroom setting. As a result, there may be higher accuracy. So because they have more time to develop their thought or write down what they want to write down, there's probably higher accuracy with that, and they're not going to rely so much on their L1. They're probably going to focus more on their L2 in order to be effective. And then, so we see these in the classroom, these two points. Now, in a natural setting where it's a little more spontaneous, the learner may rely on the explicit L2 knowledge and avoid using their L1 knowledge. This may cause more errors, and we will contrast this idea to the idea on the next slide, because personally, when I read that, I didn't agree with it. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because I feel like when I'm put on the spot as a Spanish speaker, I go to my L1 knowledge probably. Like I think about how do I want to say it in English? Like how would I say it in English? And how I'm going to say it in Spanish. So that's why I want to kind of argue that next point. Another important note to make about the macro contextual influences is that this focuses on negative transfer, not really positive transfer. But positive transfer can also occur and is likely to occur in both formal and informal settings. So both in natural environments and in structural classrooms. And in formal settings, for example, students may use cognates that can assist them in learning. So like you were talking about with Spanish, right? Like I think you were, Robyn, but I definitely can relate to this in Spanish. There's a lot of words that are very similar. And so if you know that.
It's not
oh,
working. Oh, there she is.
Oh, we're back. Phew. I think it's still recording. I lost Wi-Fi.
It's still recording.
Okay,
Oh,
Miss
no.
Shirley, we're back. I lost Wi-Fi.
Yes.
I think we're still recording. So I'm going to keep going with my presentation. I hope I can share my screen. That might be a thing. With Sarah going next. I don't know.
Oh, wait, hold on. It made me the host. Maybe I have to.
What?
Yeah, well, you left and it told me you are the host now. Hold on. Let me see.
That's so weird. Okay.
Oh, no.
Well,
You're the host. You're the host again. Okay, never mind.
well, how do I make it so I can share my screen again with you guys?
I don't know. Let's see. I can share mine, but
You
that
can?
doesn't help you.
Okay, I can share mine.
Yeah.
As long as you can share yours next.
Yeah.
Okay, Miss Early, we're back on track. Here we go. All right, I know where I was at least. Okay, so
You were arguing the
my
point
point
about
was-
the individual, the macro yeah, you were arguing that point.
yeah, so what can be nice is like you can see positive transfer of like, I know like temperature in Spanish is temperatura, right? And like the spelling is very similar. And so that would actually help me. I'd have positive transfer in that. So I just wanted to point that out as well. And then looking at the next slide, micro contextual influences is the point that style makes a difference. We can relate to that as women. Style does make a difference, right? If we look good, we're gonna feel good. So we have careful style versus vernacular style. And the theorists behind this idea were Tyrone in 1982 and Jarvis and Pavlenko in 2008. So that's some newer ideas there. The beliefs held still were focused on negative transfer. And Tyrone in 1982 says that negative transfer was more likely to be evident in learners' careful style than their day-to-day language style. Since they're trying to be accurate, they may pull from all language resources, including their L1 knowledge. See, that to me makes a little more sense. Like if they're trying to be accurate, they're thinking of L2, maybe rules or order, but they're also like going back to their L1 because they want to make sure that their thought is being is really being stated. So Jarvis and Pavlenko kind of look at Tyrone's idea and they compare it back to that macro contextual influence. And so Jarvis and Pavlenko realized that Tyrone's view may contradict the view held by theorists of macro contextual influences. And in order to find some common ground, they noted that this may depend on the importance of social factors in given situations. So this can, basically the whole point of this, well, this can all depend, right? Which is kind of what we've heard a lot with all these theories. What can we learn from these two ideas, these micro and macro contextual influences? Learners with little L2 knowledge may be apt to not participate in classroom discussion because they fear embarrassment. And we can see negative and positive transfer in both situations, right? We see these in careful style and vernacular style under the micro, and under the macro, we see it in planned classroom activities versus, hey, you're walking out on the street and it's a natural setting and you have to be more spontaneous and think on the spot. So I guess the question is, when is it more negative? When is it more positive? And I think what's hard to tell, again, this is such an early study, that people aren't exactly quite sure. So yeah, that's on that point. And my last point is on individual influences. And we kind of talked about these before, but it again comes right back up in this chapter, age and aptitude. What I thought was interesting about age is Ellis refers to this and he says that age influences reliance on L1 knowledge. So younger learners rely less on their L1 and they exhibit less transfer than older learners. Guion, Fiege, Liu, and Yanni Kim-Shian in 2000 stated that the more established the L1 is, the more reliance the learner will have on it. So we see this transfer of grammatical forms is also less likely for, I probably should say what I'm talking about. That's going to be for like younger learners, where for older learners, they probably are going to transfer some of their grammar forms. Older learners may be advantageous when the target language and source language forms are similar. Robyn, you kind of talked about this point. So there can be more positive transfer there, especially when we're looking at vocabulary, like I mentioned, with the cognates. For aptitude, we see there's this connection between aptitude and language acquisition. So Odlin in 1989 believed that learners with strong phonetic coding ability and phonological memory may be more equipped to hear and produce the sounds of the L2 language. Learners with lower levels of language skills in their L1 may also struggle to acquire an L2. So there's a correlation there. One of the things I can think of, actually, even on our journal entry this week, we had to talk about this with reading ability. So if someone struggles to read in their first language, or maybe they're even illiterate, does that transfer to their second language? or someone's really good in their first language, they really are maybe a good writer, a good speaker, does that transfer then when they're learning a second language? I think it does. And then lastly, learners with strong language analytical abilities will be able to identify the similarities and differences between grammar, which encourages positive transfer and less negative transfer. So again, my 3 points were on focusing again on translanguaging. Is that effective? Is that important? Is that something we should look at as future instructors? And then what are some of the major factors? I thought context was important when looking at language transfer, as well as individual influences. Lastly, my references, as we know, are to the article from Ofelia Garcia and several other authors, and then from Rod Ellis, Understanding the Social Second Language Acquisition. Thanks for listening. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Allison.
Alrighty, thank you, Betsy. Today I am going to be focusing on the linguistic factors of language transfer, which Robyn did do a good job of covering, but I will just reiterate some points that I had. Let me share the screen. All right, so I have this handy presentation. There we go. Okay, so the role of the first language in second language acquisition. Whoop. Okay, so as you both have already talked about, the Ellis chapter really focuses on language transfer, which I'll just reiterate is when one language has an effect on the other language. And actually at the end of the chapter in this conclusion, Ellis does go into that there has been research done on how does this, when you're learning a second language, can affect your first language. I won't get too into that because he also doesn't get too into that, but I thought it was interesting. So it kind of, they play on each other. So your first language in this chapter is argued that the first language affects how you learn your second language, but also after you are learning your second language can affect your first language. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting. So the 5 factors, as we've all said, are linguistic, psycholinguistic, contextual, developmental, and individual. Alrighty, and I'm going to be focusing on linguistic factors. The first one, plays into linguistic differences and like learning difficulties. So the 2 hypotheses in this section were similarity differential rate hypothesis, which was studied by Roy Major and Yoon-Yi Kim in 1996. And it mainly, you can sum it down to unfamiliar sounds are difficult at first to learn, and also similar sounds are easily overlooked. So if you're talking about like the similarity of well, I'll get into language differences, but this kind of is like a prequel to that. So like, although unfamiliar sounds are difficult to learn at first for second language learners, over time, those are like strengthened, and then sounds that sound similar, like it just says, are overlooked, and that's where more errors occur. And the other hypothesis, morphological congruency hypothesis, is also very similar, and that's by Zhang, Chanova, Matsua, and Wang in 2011, which is very recent. This one, very easily summed, is that similar grammatical morphemes promotes easier learning. So the more similar the languages are, it's easier to learn. And this is where we're talking about that like plural S that Robyn talked about. So, or that kind of situation where some language learners, like Japanese learners of English, have problems placing that plural S because it's not there in their language. It just doesn't happen. And a lot of times these rules have long-lasting effects on the language learner. So these are things that are really hard to get over. So if you don't the Japanese language doesn't have that in their language. So often adult Japanese language learners have a hard time breaking that, either adding the S or not putting the S in to plural nouns. Anyway. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Okay, and so the next thing, language distance. This one, I don't want to say it's self-explanatory because it gets kind of funky in there, but so in general, the larger the difference between the first language and target language, the more difficult the target language is to learn. So like Robyn said, the book gives the example of Dutch and English are relatively similar compared to like English and Chinese are very not similar at all. So it's often harder when the distance is longer. Anyway, so one thing I wanted to touch on is that there are, let me get my thoughts together. So Soljam, I'm pronouncing that wrong, but Soljam in 1976 and Ringbaum in 1978 both found positive and negative effects of Swedish speaking and Finnish speaking Finns when learning English. So Swedish is the language that's more similar to English than Finnish, but the Swedish speakers found it more comfortable to learn English, but they made more mistakes because they were so comfortable with it. That's one of the negative effects. So they could learn it a little bit easier, but they had more mistakes along the way. And the Finnish speakers were less likely to transfer elements from their first language to the second language because it was so different, if that makes sense. So even though it was a little harder to learn, they're so different that it was harder to apply the structure to like their first language structure to their second language, if that makes sense. Okay, I can't press the space bar, I keep forgetting. Okay, and the next part I wanted to talk about was markedness. And as we saw earlier in Robyn's exercise, even though this is one of my main points, I still have a hard time. It's hard for me to grasp, but I think I got it. So basically, a marked linguistic feature, you can boil it down to a special or uncommon feature in a particular language, and an unmarked is basic or universal linguistic feature. At least that's how I interpreted the text. So an unmarked is something that happens in multiple languages or could be considered universal, like the Pied Piper example. The Pied Piper, so you're attaching like to whom, like you're putting that I'm gonna explain this horribly, but that is more common. That is an unmarked feature, and it's more common in more languages to put the to whom like directly together. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought Robyn was gonna say something. Anyway, and then
I'm sorry, my daughter came in. I apologize.
You're fine. And then the preposition straining, these are the two like direct examples the book uses. So like, who did you speak to? So separating the to from the who, that is a marked feature, which is relatively uncommon. It's more common to have the other like Pied Piper example. But this markedness differential hypothesis, it was formed by Fred Ekman in 1997, and there's three like main, do I want to say hypotheses? I don't know, three main points that he makes. So the areas of the target language which differ and are more marked than in the native language are more difficult for the person to learn. Okay, and that degree of difficulty depends on the degree of markedness. and also that the areas of target language which differ but not which are not more marked will not be difficult. That's what he says. Which it's all very confusing to me. I think I still understand it, but I think it's important in second language acquisition and the role that first language plays in second language acquisition. Anyway, that is the end of my presentation. Yes, let us discuss now. I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Sarah and Betsy, for your insightful presentations. And hold on, what did I do with my pencil? Ah, there it is. Okay, so let's decide now, what are our 5 most important takeaways that we got from our presentations tonight? So Betsy talked about the interlanguage and how we can use that in the classroom. And then Sarah talked about the linguistic factors, and then I talked about the psycholinguistic factors, the linguistic factors, and the developmental factors. So
Yeah, I think one thing that's kind of cool, we all mentioned at least one of the 5 factors listed on in the Ellis textbook on 121. The linguistic, psycholinguistic, contextual, developmental, and individual. So maybe I'm just throwing an idea out here, but maybe we pick those 5 and we talk about, which order they should go in. I mean, I liked the translanguaging. I think it was important to bring up because it was one of the articles we read, and that's why I wanted to bring it up in my presentation.
Mm-hmm.
However, that's like one specific method.
Yeah.
Where I think factors were, really the biggest point that I found, if we had to come up with one main point, it was transference, right? The language transfer, like what gets transferred from L1 to L2, that was kind of the direction we're looking at since we're doing second language acquisition. And I think those 5 factors are probably the most 5 important points.
I think personally I could identify more, not necessarily more with the language distance as far as like grammar or words are concerned, not necessarily with the similarity differential rate hypothesis and pronunciation type things, morphemes and stuff like that, but the actual semantics and grammar. I don't know. I've never put pronunciation as much. I understand it, but to me, the grammar and the semantics and the mechanics of language transfer seem to be more. I get that more.
That's interesting you say that, actually, to me, as a second language learner. Because I think that's probably the most difficult part for me is the grammar and the semantics. I think learning how to say the sounds and like learn the vocabulary came more naturally for me, I'd say, with Spanish. But like even now, as someone that's been studying Spanish for years and like did a study abroad and still uses it from time to time now, I definitely know I make grammar mistakes. Like I know sentence order sometimes is not right. However, I feel like I'm pretty understood by most people. So I don't know if that's something that's like interesting to talk about.
Yeah, because
and what do we find?
I think pronunciation, while it doesn't need to be perfect, I do think it does, because you can, well, at least I know for me in Korean, like I could say something grammatically correct to somebody, but with a foreigner accent, and they wouldn't understand me. Like, and they have a lot of like borrowed words, like especially if you go to like a Starbucks where the menu this is the same, like caramel macchiato, and like if you don't say it like a Korean person would say it, they're like, huh? Even though it's like,
Yeah.
So I think
do you think that's a cultural thing as much as it is, though? They're like, oh, well, we know, number one, you have red hair, but number two, is it kind of a thing where, oh, well, you're not one of us, and kind of a gatekeeper type thing.
Yes, I see what you're saying, because one time I was taking out the trash and I couldn't find, like, in Korea they sort their trash like very particularly, like extremely extreme, like you have to put everything like vinyl and like plastic, and it's a very complicated trash system. And I was staying at an Airbnb and I was trying to take out my trash, and it was actually just like trash that couldn't be recycled. And I asked the guy working at the dump, I was like, hey, where's the trash can? And he just like took it and started sorting it. And I was like, oh, no, it's like trash. And he was like, you don't know any. But that was at the end of my stay, and I know I was pronouncing everything correctly. But you're right, Robyn. He just saw me being a foreigner and was like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, no, don't go through my trash. It's trash. I already sorted it. Anyway.
Yeah,
So you
I
do
don't.
have a point.
Yeah, I do though. I do think pronunciation is important. I really do.
Yeah.
And just, I know, like, I'm taking.
No, I'm not dismissing pronunciation. I'm really not. But then I also think, I know, like in Spanish, I think you said it, like every noun, or not noun, but every vowel has a distinct, you don't have like in English where you have boot, B-O-O-T, or book, where you have the or oo. Every letter and noun and consonant has its own pronunciation. And
Right.
so I wouldn't say it's easy. That's not the right way to put it, but I would say it's easier, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, between like
And
Spanish and
yeah.
in English, like there's 5 sounds in Spanish, like 5 vowel sounds. In English, there's 15. So
Yeah.
it's like they literally can't hear certain sounds. And so you're actually helping them learn them. And so imagine if you can't hear a sound, then you're like being asked to produce it. And then if you can't produce it, then the English speaker can't understand you. So it can be really, really complicated, I think. Or like, I'll give you an example. Well, so for one of my projects I have to do, I'm doing a project on an actual person, and I had to do a recording with her. And so she had to go read through this prompt I had made. And she listened to herself afterward, and she goes, no wonder people can't understand me. Because like she could hear that she sounded so different than I do, or like another English speaker that she works with at the hotel, or maybe a customer that comes in. And so I think it is important. Now, as far as like, I guess when we're looking at these 5 categories or these 5 factors, I'm wondering how, I guess it would be linguistic. So factors relating to the linguistic properties of the native and target languages. Man, I don't even know what order. I feel like they're so important, all of them.
They're all, yeah, it's really hard to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay, I think. Okay, so I think. Do you think language distance is pretty important?
Yes, I think it is.
Okay.
I go back and forth on it, honestly. Because they can't really prove. Like one where like just because a language just seems closer, like German and English, or you use the example Swedish and Finnish speakers. Like you were able to point out like 2 different situations, like in a study that was talked about in Ellis, and how they weren't able to say, oh, just because I think it wasn't it Swedish was closer to English or Finnish? I can't remember.
Swedish.
Okay,
so because Swedish was closer, you would think they would have less errors, but that wasn't always the case.
Right.
It's true. And like, I think, like for me, I learned French. I took French for 4 years in high school and 1 semester in college. Zilch. I learned nothing. And I learned the Korean alphabet in like 2 days. Like I had it memorized because I was more motivated. Like I took French in high school because I had to pick a language. but I actively wanted to learn Korean, like, because I was more interested in it, and that goes into the individual, like, that's my aptitude. Like, I was more motivated to learn Korean. So even though you would think French is closer to English, I had an way easier time learning Korean than I did French, that's
Aha.
prime example right there.
Mhm.
That's a really good example.
I think language distance can play a factor into it, but I just totally talked myself out of me saying it's really important because I just made that example because I had a really hard time learning French, but learning Korean was really easy for me. I would say.
Yeah. So then maybe we say that individual goes towards the top of our list.
Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely say that,
Because
especially
that goes back to aptitude, motivation, age, which we've talked about in other chapters, and we know that that is a factor we have to think about and understand. So maybe we put that towards like the top. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think contextual can be towards the bottom. Like, even though I think the context in which you're learning is important, I
Yeah.
think in this particular topic, not as much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because when I was reading that context section, it was like, now I'm going to go back. I remember reading it and I was like, I mean, yeah, but.
Yeah, I didn't get that as much as I did the others.
Oh, but that was your like two big things, Betsy, that you
Yeah, well,
talked a lot about.
Yeah, it's kind of, I know, I'm kind of being the one that's going against you guys tonight. Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good.
I'm being the arguer tonight. Well,
That's
because like
fine.
how I understood the contextual was really looking at the place that language is being used, right? Is it happening like in a
Right.
natural environment, or is it happening in a classroom? And based on those environmental factors, context, how do we see transference? And with both
True,
macro and micro, we saw it was a lot of time it was for this focus on negative transference, or transfer.
Yeah, like in macro, like on a macro scale, like it was saying negative transfers are less common when you're in a classroom setting.
Right, because there's more pressure.
Versus,
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, because there's more pressure.
From your peers, from your teacher. Where on a micro, like we're looking at, what was it? It was talking about vernacular style versus like careful style. So like when you're trying to just to do everything perfectly versus like, hey, I'm talking to my friend, I'm comfortable. How do we see that occur? So I don't know. I personally think it's kind of important, but I don't know. Let's talk about some of the other ones too. What are some of the other ones? Because you guys focus more on those than I did. So I don't have as much knowledge on those probably because I didn't look into it as deep.
Let's see.
Because under the linguistic, Robyn, I did take some notes.
Yeah.
It was talking about the contrastive analysis hypothesis and language distance. Yeah, because I even wrote in my note there on the language distance, like, is it just if it's closer? Is there more positive transfer or negative? And I wrote could be either. Like, it's hard to know.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be either. And they did say it could be both positive and negative.
Right.
The common assumption was, and you know, I totally bought into, before I read this chapter, I totally bought into it. Well, yeah, you know, I think that a language distance would be easier because just I can't now, you know, Sarah has a different story, but personally I can't see myself learning a ideogram based language. I just can't wrap my head around it versus a phonetic language.
Well, Korean has an alphabet. It's not like Chinese. Korean has an actual alphabet.
Oh, okay.
With like consonants and vowels. So.
Yeah, Robyn, you're picturing symbols, aren't you? You're like,
yeah, I am.
How can I do that?
Yeah, I am.
Chinese.
Well, and you got to remember too, writing versus speaking is going to be different too in those kind of languages. Yeah. So you might be actually speak it better, but maybe not be able to write it.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes back to, I think I talk about that a little bit more too, about I think I touched on it a bit. about like we talk about transference, like how sometimes it can be more positive in written form, I think,
Yeah.
versus like it can be more negative sometimes with like spoken form because you can make more errors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Psycholinguistic. I'm just trying to get my head around all these again. Psycholinguistic. You talked about cognates, like with
Yeah.
Brecken and broke, which means break.
Um, Brecken. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And
let's see. I would say developmental would be, but I would say that would be number 4.
And then more the middle, or towards the end
Uh-huh.
actually.
Let's see. And actually, I mean, there was a lot of things in chapter 4. And Dr. Ellis, I'm not gonna lie, I read chapter 4 instead of chapter 6, so I was all about chapter 4. But yeah. So
Oh,
Dr. Ellis, I'm sorry, Ms. Early. I'm thinking of our author of the book. Ms. Early, yeah, I read chapter 4. So but yeah, I think developmental, although I really, I mean, it was good, but yeah, that could be, I could see a sequence of acquisition and an order of acquisition in language transfer, but I don't think, I can see that kind of being down lower.
I would agree with you actually on that point. I think I'd put it lower too. Because I feel like developmental and linguistic, like you can, like as you learn, those are things you start to work on. Like you
Right. Yeah.
right?
To me, that's more of like a, I wouldn't say, excuse me, I wouldn't say formal. That's not the right way to put it, but maybe cognitive. Yeah. Maybe more cognitive.
Okay, so I've got linguistic personally. I think linguistic would go to the bottom because we talked about how language distance, like that's kind of, there's not like a lot to support that right now. Developmental at 4.
Even in that section, they say, where was it? Never mind, keep going. I'll find it later. But they made a point to say like, not, this isn't backed up, but like there's a lot of opposing, there's like no one consensus like in the linguistic part. Anyway, I agree with you. I think it should be on the bottom.
All right, so we got
Sarah,
1, 2, and 3. We got to figure out 1, 2, and 3. And what's the other one?
Let's see. Individual. We said that would be number 1.
Okay.
Aptitude, motivation, extrinsic, age. So
I think contextual would be 2. Like where's the place they're learning and what's happening in those environments.
Yeah. That goes back to social. Yeah, I could see that. And then that would be psycholinguistic would be number 3.
Yeah, guys, those are like our top 3 we've talked about anyway, right? Social, cognitive.
Yeah.
And like those like the motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
I think we got it. We actually came to an agreement at some point too. After me arguing with you a little bit on those.
That's okay.
Hey, but normally we just get along the whole time, so this will be a different one for Miss Early to watch.
Yeah.
Okay, so Miss Early, number 1, we've got individual because we look that and we think of motivation, aptitude, age, which are all factors we've talked about a lot in this course. Contextual, where are our learners learning the language?
Yeah.
And how are they impacted? And how does their L1 transfer to their L2 and L2 to even L1, as I heard Sarah mention a little bit. 3rd, psycholinguistic, which is more of that cognitive view.
Yeah.
And then developmental, we talked about just the talked about like
order
plural
and
endings and recognizing endings, and how that's something that we think can come along a little bit later in the language development. And then linguistic, we talked about language distance and how that is not extremely clear what the effects are. So I think that concludes this.
Yay.
Thanks for watching.
So, all right. Thank you. Bye.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.